Greetings, everyone. My name is Sampriti Das, and I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Psychology, Krishna Jayanti College, Bangalore. This lecture is covering the topic framing of qualitative research. Through this lecture, I will be talking about framing as a general idea which is applicable to both quantitative and qualitative research as well. But the emphasis of this lecture in understanding framing will be how we frame qualitative research. Before we begin, I would like to give my thanks or my gratitude to my department colleagues who have contributed in their own ways to help me develop the content for this particular lecture. The topics that will be covered today would include the general idea of framing, the role of the researcher in framing, certain important related concepts to framing, and how evaluation and analysis of qualitative data, as well as understanding generalization or transferability of research results, can also have a strong say in the framing process of qualitative research or in the framing process of research. So, what do we understand by framing? What is framing in research? Framing involves planning a research based on paradigms, theories, methodologies, and evaluations. So basically, if we have to go with this definition and its understanding, the understanding that it is implying, we would want to say that framing is an entire process that involves the researcher in planning the entire research before it is begun. So, to do that, a researcher will be involved in deciding on the paradigms that are appropriate for a particular research, the theories that are applicable, and in light of those theories, what could be the area of study, the purpose of the study, the objective, and to achieve those objectives, what kind of methodologies will be required to be employed. And finally, those methodologies, the evaluations that will be provided, whether they would be justifying the objective or purpose that was already set. So it will include the researcher being involved in an iterative process. When we say an iterative process, we mean a reflective process of moving from one step to the other, back to the former step, again coming back to the next steps. So it will be a shift of gaining insight, of gaining reflections from one step to another, and at times moving back and forth between the steps. Hence, the researcher will be engaged or will be involved in identifying as well as justifying, giving rationale, giving reasons, strong reasons for the appropriate course of action or the designated appropriate course of action that the researcher is highlighting, the researcher is bringing forth to go ahead with a particular research. Framing begins from the point when a research area is chosen because when we chose a research area, we already give an understanding, we already hold up explanations of why research in that particular area is required. Once we chose the area, we go even more specific, layer by layer, to find out more sub areas. And we target certain sub areas with specific variables that we want to explore. So, understanding ultimately the ultimate drawing up of a particular research area or research domain, a phenomena of study, would engage the researcher in considering all other methodologies or all other ways of exploration that were considered in previous researches in already existing literature. Such exploration gives the researcher an idea of how they would like to go ahead with their research. And to begin in the journey, the first thing will be to identify the specific area of research. And the second basic thing is to find out, to showcase the rationale, the purpose, the significance of doing in that particular highlighted area. To involve in such a sincere and sensitive process, there are certain prerequisites. And the prerequisite that we are going to mention here, or I would like to highlight here, is having good knowledge on the basic concepts of research. Like, what is the meaning of research? What is the purpose of research in general? What is the meaning of scientific evidence or a scientific inquiry? What are certain philosophical foundations that guides research? Ontological stances, epistemological choices or epistemological stances, research methodology based on those ontological and epistemological stances, and finally, the course of analysis of data. Because analysis of data gives us the results that has to be reported for the data, and the report has to be in line with the objective of the research. It should justify the aim of the research. The important concepts or related concepts that are really important to understanding framing of research are ontology, epistemology, axiology, and methodology. Well, there can be many more other concepts, but as a preliminary understanding of framing, it is important that the researcher understands these basic concepts. As we move on throughout the lecture, we will also have a look at the role of the researcher, the problem statement, etc. So, coming back to the important concepts, ontology, epistemology are philosophical backbones of research. When we say ontology, we particularly point to the knowledge of reality, the idea of how reality exists, whether regarding a particular phenomena there is one singular universal reality or truth, or there can be multiple realities or multiple truths based on variations in perception from person to person or context to context. So, the first idea of reality that I was talking about, where a phenomena may exist, the truth of a phenomena is one or universal or singular, is a stance that is taken up by something called the positivist stance, positivist ontology, usually very core to quantitative studies. And the second variation I was talking about, where we encourage, we believe, or a researcher believes or encourages the existence of multiple truths or multiple realities, depending upon perceptions that are prevailing when we vary from person to person or context to context, is something, ontological stance, that is core to qualitative research. Likewise, from the belief in how knowledge exists, we go on to the epistemological stance of how that knowledge has been existing, how that knowledge has been gained, how do we know what we know, based on the existence of a truth, whether it is existing as a singular truth or it has multiple realities. How did all those realities come into existence, or how do we know that there is only one particular truth? So, what kind of forces, usually social and cultural, have led the path to understanding of whatever we understand today as however it is? So, suppose, for example, I know that emotions can have variations from culture to culture. And how do I get that knowledge? How did I get to know the concept of emotion? And then it varies from culture to culture. My personal experiences, I have been trained, I have been taught, I have observed. How did I get to know? So, these understanding comes under what we call as the epistemology. Axiology can be understood by considering that researchers, because they are also socially constructed people, because they have also been influenced based on their backgrounds, can hold certain values, certain beliefs. If not anything, then at least the values of rightness or wrongness, good, bad, etc. So, holding these values as researchers, how does that impact, or how that can possibly impact or influence my study or any researcher's study? The values that I hold based on a particular background that I have, be it a background in training, be it a background in a social environment, etc., how those values will ultimately impact my study or how it can possibly influence my study. Will it limit, will certain perceptions limit my perception to look at the data I have while analyzing it? Or um, my background will empower me to further shape my perceptions based on the data I have. So, how that is axiology, how we understand the influence of a researcher's values, judgments on the ongoing study or the upcoming study. Then, finally, the understanding of methodology. Methodology can be understood as an approach that we tend to take to explore the knowledge, to go forward with the study, and methodology will always be based on certain principles or specific methods. So, hence, indicating there can be multiple methodologies existing for both qualitative and quantitative research. When we are understanding these important concepts, we also have to take into certain roles as researchers. Especially in qualitative research, the researcher himself or herself is a tool because the data that has been recorded has been passed through the medium called a researcher. Someone is recording that data. That means there is a medium through which the data is being passed until finally it gets recorded. And this medium is the data, is the researcher. So the researcher in qualitative research is considered as a tool. Hence, it is important that the researcher as a tool involves oneself into processes like reflection, reflexivity, careful consideration of assumptions and biasness, deciding on the purpose and objective of the study, provide clarity to other researchers or the research community through description, analysis, and interpretation about the research. Reflection involves the researcher in interpreting the data that has been collected or the data that will be collected in terms of whether a particular method will be enough or there will be a need for multiple methods, multiple sources of information also at times. In qualitative research, it can be challenging at times to help oneself as a researcher in gathering data. The data is gathered through people at times. So people may have multiple versions of their story, or they might not want to give up certain information about a particular context. So, is there only one way through which the data will have to be gathered, leading to which will lead to a particular analysis, or there is a requirement for multiple methods, multiple ways to approach data collection in qualitative research? So, this kind of reflection regarding the data will have to be made by the researcher. Reflexivity would mean the researcher employing oneself in reflecting on the researcher as a tool. Reflection is focused towards making interpretations and decisions regarding the data. Reflexivity is gaining an insight, it's a skill basically of understanding oneself as a researcher, as a tool. So, reflexivity would include the researcher constantly keeping a check on personal biasnesses, personal attitudes, the way they are understanding certain collection of data, the way they are understanding the information that is in front of them. Hence, we move on to careful consideration of the assumptions and biasness that can be existing. So, this is a very sensitive area to work on because sometimes, as researchers, we may not be aware that we hold certain biasnesses. Sometimes, as researchers, we may not be aware that the information that is coming to us is being processed with these existing biasnesses. So it is important, especially advised in qualitative researches, to not approach a research with preconceived assumptions or biasnesses to such a level that it will impact the entire course of data collection as well as analysis. If we have a limited perception, we maybe collecting only those information that we feel as important based on the kind of assumptions that we have or perceptions or biasnesses that we have. And hence, the final report or the ultimate report that we are going to prepare will be only based on a very biased collection, handful amount of data. It will not be a holistic perspective. And if the collection itself was not, the data collection was itself was not holistic, then the data is not trustworthy or the data may not be authentic. It may not be considered standardized in terms of trustworthiness and authenticity. We will also be proceeding in this lecture to getting a brief idea or a surface idea about what is trustworthiness and authenticity of data and how do we decide on these topics, decide on this criteria. The role of the researcher also revolves around deciding the purpose and objective of the study. When we hold up a particular study area, a domain, or a phenomena, it is important for us to justify why research is required in that area. What is the purpose of research in that area? What benefits it is going to bring up? And based on those benefits, ultimate benefits and implications, what should be the objective of the study? That if we attain that objective, we will be able to answer those questions on implications and benefits, etc. To do this, we will have to hold up very clear description, very clear analysis, transparent interpretations of why we think research is required in a particular area. We will have to justify, defend our idea of understanding the requirement of research in an area. Hence, framing of a qualitative research or any research will indulge a researcher in a process of questioning. This questioning is ultimately going to help the researcher choose the appropriate methodology out of the range of methodologies that may prevail. Choosing the appropriate methodology will set the direction for the research in an action based approach. We are going to work on that plan once we choose that methodology. Hence, choosing the appropriate methodology is equally important as choosing the area of research and justifying why research is required in that particular area. An example that I would like to mention here is of the 5-question method for framing qualitative research, which was given by McCaslin and Scott in 2003. So this method employs asking 5 questions. Usually, like what would be the purpose of this research? What would be the objective of this research? Answering which leads us to make a good choice of which tradition of qualitative research we would like to choose out of the 5 major traditions that has been identified by McCaslin and Scott. And these traditions are biography, ethnography, phenomenology, grounded theory, and case study. So these questions enables especially novice researchers to choose that one appropriate methodology for their research. This process is not easy, and something like the 5-question method helps the researchers attain some amount of ease, some amount of clarity in finally being confident about the methodology that they choose. When we choose the methodology should be something that is justifiable enough to explore the problem statement. The problem statement is a refinedly defined version of the central theme of the research, the central theme of the study. Essential to a problem statement is the central theme of the study, the matter of study or the phenomena of study, and in whatever truth version it exists. This will be based on available evidence from existing literature. For example, if I say that my problem statement captures the theme domestic violence among working women in a particular culture, then I would have to draw evidence that research is required or there are gaps over there or there are areas over there where research can do good to that community, where research can contribute to that community. So a problem statement would give us a view of this entire scenario, the domestic violence, in what ways it occurs, how is it being coped with, how women in this particular society thinks about domestic violence. So that will be our area of study, the problem statement. And when we arrive at the problem statement, when we arrive at um, explaining the problem or the focus of the study, the area of the study, the where, why, what, how, then the study gets a direction, or it begins to get a direction to further proceed, or to further enable the researcher to proceed to choosing the methodology, and henceforth giving an idea about what kind of a frame the research is getting. Uh, we define the research, we define the problem statement, we get an understanding of what kind of a methodology will help it, uh, and then we will have to arrive at an understanding of whether a particular way of analyzing data will give us such an analysis report that the data becomes applicable to other settings. In quantitative research, this applicability to other settings is much broader when compared to qualitative research. And because of its broadness, we term it as generalization. It can be generalized as a one truth or universal truth to an extent, uh, to most people around the world, or to a larger population around the world in the universe. While in qualitative data, the encouragement from the beginning itself is not to find out things that can be generalizable, but to find out things that are more in-depth understanding. It is not dealing with surface understanding, it is dealing with in-depth understanding. And when we go in-depth, we become more and more context specific in the process. Hence, results from one particular qualitative data may not be something that is completely applicable to another setting. But to quite an extent, it may be applicable where two situations are sharing similar characteristics or similar specific um, features. So, in that kind of a situation, the transferability, the idea of transferability will be more appropriate to explain that results from a qualitative study can be or can have possibility of being true to another setting, provided both these settings are having similar features. So we have to target transferability in a heightened sense in qualitative research, and to do that we will have to apply standards while analyzing the data, because the answers are lying there. The answers to justify our objective is lying there. To standardize analysis of data in quantitative research, we can have confidence in terms of quantity, in terms of numbers, in terms of statistical analysis. And in qualitative data, the same confidence can be brought up by evaluative criteria that are specific to qualitative data. These evaluative criteria, if we have to talk about in quantitative sense, we can talk about internal validity, external validity, reliability, objectivity, which can be shown with numerical expressions. In qualitative data, again, the expression of the same also is in terms of words or language. So the evaluative criteria will be can be considered equivalent to, but not similar, through concepts like trustworthiness of the results, credibility, confirmability, etc. Now, this criteria that I just mentioned are taken from the evaluative criteria that was given by Lincoln and Guba in 1986. Again, in qualitative research, there does not exist only one evaluative criteria. There are multiple evaluative criteria, like another example could be one given by Tracy in 2010. So these evaluative criteria, some are generally applicable to all qualitative research, and some, even though generally applicable, may be more appropriate towards certain types of qualitative research, like ethnography, for example, or participant observation, another example, like evaluative criteria that are mostly appropriate for ethnography or evaluative criteria that are mostly appropriate for participant observation research. Hence, even while choosing the standards for analyzing data, a qualitative researcher will have to decide which is the appropriate evaluative criteria they are going to choose, because it will help the researcher to provide those clarity, transparency, explanations to how they arrived at the results that they are presenting, how they arrived at the results that are reported in the final um, written report of a particular qualitative research. Hence, the entire process of framing actually gives a researcher a confidence to go ahead with the research and to frame the research, to decide before we begin with a research of what could be the area, what is the purpose of the study, rationale, significance, methodology employed, analysis of data, choosing the standard analysis of data, choosing the evaluative criteria, and finally deciding on how transferable or generalizable the results will be, is or can be termed as or can be understood as framing of research. So this framing enables a researcher to proceed through the research with confidence and stick to the specific direction that is required to finally answer the research questions, to finally achieve the objectives that have been made, that have been decided for that particular research. Here's the references that I have followed, as well as I can also put them up as suggested readings to the viewers here. However, the sources of information is not limited to these references. Um, I would really like to encourage all the viewers or listeners to go through any good quality research books, research methodology books, as well as updated research articles that we have an access to constantly. Thank you.